is of Professor Fumi Paramalam. It's an honor to moderate this session. A very great minds and great scholars. So, why are we here? Gender studies in Nigeria started as a small academic interest, but have now become something essential for understanding politics, economics, and even development. And this shift has happened because of Nigerian scholars who show that development is shaped by gender, to show that gender is not a standalone issue. And among these scholars is Professor Fumi Paramalam, which we are honoring today with this roundtable. Over time, she has combined strong academic research with practical activism. And today, we gather not to just celebrate an extraordinary scholar, but also a mentor, an advocate, and also to take seriously the urgent questions that are live or our work poses to all of us. And our, our scholarship has never stopped at just critique. It has consistently pushed towards policies, programs, and activism that create real change for women and also for the society at large. So it's really a great honor to have all of us on this round table. And this round table is designed to do two things, but to reflect on an immense contribution and to use them as to reflect on an immense contribution and also to use them as a springboard to think about the future, that is a new gender agenda. So what should a new gender agenda for Nigeria look like? Those are some of the questions that we will be interrogating today. And to help us unpack these issues, we are privileged to have distinguished panel of scholars and practitioners who will help us critically engage with their own ideas from their own perspective as scholars. So, allow me to introduce our speakers for this round table. So, I'm going to start with a distinguished honoree, which is Professor Olufumilayo Paramalam. Professor Olufumilayo Josephine Paramalam, MNI, is the Director of Studies at the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, KURU, a distinguished scholar and practitioner in development studies, gender policy, peace and security, and leadership development. She holds a PhD in development studies from the University of Leeds, an MA in international law and diplomacy from the University of Jos, and a BA Hons in French/Portuguese from the University of Ife with advanced studies in France. Her professional development includes program in leadership, advocacy, research, methodology, statistical and qualitative analysis, and gender and peace studies, including prestigious fellowships at the Harvard Kennedy School and the University of Birmingham. At NIPS, Paramalam has served as Institute Orator, internal and external examiner, and trainer for senior executives, mentoring participants through policy strategy and leadership courses, senior executive courses, long essay, and specialized workshop. She has contributed to national policy development, including legislative budgeting, participatory development frameworks, and national security strategy. As a senior researcher, Professor Malam has led and collaborated on projects funded by USAID, DFID, UN Women, ActionAid, and the Ford Foundation, successfully securing grants for transformative initiatives in gender, peace building, and women empowerment. Our research has been presented at national and international conferences across the USA, UK, Australia, Poland, and Nigeria, covering topics around gender budgeting, women empowerment, and domestication of CEDAR. By now, I expect I will be dropping some emojis, some clappings in the comment section because this woman is really a remarkable scholar. I'll go further. In her role as National Coordinator of Christian Women for Excellence and Empowerment in Nigerian Society, she has spearheaded initiatives including humanitarian assistance for survivors of violence, girls leadership and mentoring programs. the Safe Harbor Initiative for Victims of Gender-Based Violence, the Voice and Visibility of Women in Peace and Security Program, and COVID-19 response projects across multiple states. She has also contributed as a visiting professor and Senate member at the University of Jos Center for Gender Studies. Outstanding contribution have earned numerous awards and fellowship, including the Ford Foundation International Fellowship, Cadbury Fellowship, African Peace Building Network Research Award, Evangelical Press Award, Women Achiever Award, and the Women's Rights Defender Award, reflecting a lifelong commitment to scholarship, leadership, and social transformation. This is a lot. Please, let's jam our hands together for her. At the heart of her work, she's committed to advancing the spiritual, social, and material well-being of African women and girls as a scholar, advocate, mentor, and community leader. Her passion is to create lasting impact through the power of the pen, advocacy, research, training, and community development. So I present to you our honorary Professor Olufunmilayo Paramalam, whom this roundtable is centered around this evening as it is in Nigeria. All right, I'll move to the next speaker, which is our distinguished chair, Professor Mojubaolu Olufunke Okume. She is a leading scholar of political science at Brooklyn College, CUNY, with research spanning democratization, political economy, gender, and diaspora studies. She bridges scholarship with activism, founder of key journals, and a voice in global advocacy, including Bring Back Our Guests, NYSC. She's recognized worldwide as a champion for justice and African development. Please, can we also have a round of applause for her? That's our distinguished chair for tonight's roundtable. Then next on my list is Professor Dong Pasha. Professor Dong Pasham is a distinguished scholar of political economy and development studies at the University of Jos and a former director of research at NIBS, a Fulbright scholar, consultant to the UNO and the ILO, and a profound member of Nigeria's Male Feminist Network. He is deeply committed to advancing social justice, peace, and gender equality in Nigeria and beyond. And we will be honored to have him tonight as our keynote speaker. Please, a round of applause for him too. Then next is our distinguished panelist, Professor Damilola Agbalajobi. Professor Damilola Agbalajobi of Obafemi Awolowo University is a leading scholar on gender governance and women's political participation. Her research spans women's representation, conflict, and electoral reform, and she has led major national and international projects that empower women, youth, and marginalized groups. She bridges academia and policy to advance inclusive development across Nigeria and beyond. A round of applause for her too. She'll be one of our panelists on this table. The next is Toby Adewumi. Toby Adewumi is a graduate student at the University of Illinois, where he teaches and researches African international relations, environmental humanities, and Black urban political ecology. Formerly a tenor researcher at Nigeria Institute of International Affairs, his current work explores fragile demographies and the lived experiences of Afro-descended communities facing displacement. A round of applause also. He will be joining us tonight as one of our panelists. Then finally on my end here is Dr. Omomayowa Abati. Dr. Omomayowa Abati is a senior research officer at the University of Essex, working on the multilingualism, conflict, and conflict resolution in African project. A political scientist with a PhD from Stellenbosch, his research explores governance, youth political representation, and how language shapes both conflict and peace across Africa. Please, let's drop a round of applause for them in the comment section. So those are distinguished speakers for tonight. And before we proceed, I would like to watch a short video of Professor Paramalam during a book launch in 2023. Stay tuned with us. We'll be back shortly. Mr. John, please, can we have the video? Mr. John, can you hear me?
Okay, me, can you hear me? I'll be sharing it from
Yes,
my
I'm
end, don't
listening.
worry. I don't think John has access to it yet. So
Okay.
just give me a minute to pull that up from my hand. Sometimes technologies cannot be relied on, so you have to have backup. Um, okay, I think we're good now. Yes, we have it. We've had let me share my screen then. Okay, can we all see my screen? 100% male representation, 0% female representation at vice presidential and presidential level. Secretaries to government, 100% male and 0% female. Every day she tells her daughter, baby, you're not just 1.6. She gotta work harder than every single man. It's just the way. She goes to the same job every day. She's overworked and underpaid. Just 'cause the way her body's made. Ain't that insane? If you've never been told how you gotta be, what you gotta wear, how you gotta speak. You never shouted, so we heard. You lived in a woman's world. Fantasy, and it's gotta change. Only want the fun, you're not the brand. If you think that's the way you are, you will live on this world. No. There we go.
All right. Thank you.
It doesn't happen by accident. Walmart Plus.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. That was a video showing Professor Paramalam's 60th birthday celebration. Once again, thank you, Ma. We're honored to have you. And for those of us that are just joining us, you're welcome to the roundtable in honor of Professor Fumi Paramalam. And the topic we're interrogating tonight remains a new gender agenda for Nigeria's development, reflection on the scholarship and praxis of Professor Fumi Paramalam. So you can do also drop your introduction in the comment section. We want to know where you're joining us from, your affiliation. Are you a mentee of Professor Paramalam, a student? Please let us know in the comment section. And the comment section is also open for networking. This is just not an intellectual gathering alone. It's also an opportunity for us to network. All right, without further ado, I would like to welcome our chairperson, in person of Professor Okume, for our opening remarks.
Good morning from this end. And please, could you take down the YouTube thing? Anyway, I am happy to be here today, but I'm just going to go directly to my comments. And I title my presentation, The Praxis Imperative. And here are my opening reflections on gender and development in Nigeria. So, distinguished colleagues, esteemed panelists and guests. We gather today, in my opinion, in the shadow of giants. Not the comfortable shadow of monuments safely erected to a distant past, but the challenging shadow cast by scholars who are still among us, still writing, still demanding that we do better. This roundtable on a new gender agenda for Nigeria's development, reflections on the scholarship and praxis of Professor Funmi Paramalam, positions us at a very special moment, a moment in which we are called to honor a body of work that should not be merely honored, but should be used and should inform policy and praxis in gender activism and even development. Let me begin with this claim that we really don't hear very often, that Nigerian feminist scholarship has changed the world, and we've been too modest about saying so. Now, I want to talk about some of our distinguished feminist scholars, and I can't be exhaustive because there are many. But I am particularly impressed with Professor Bolanle Awe as an historian of note who excavated women's histories, including those of the Yalode and others in pre-colonial Nigeria. She showed in her work that these women wielded substantive political power. She was not just adding women to history, she fundamentally destabilized colonial narratives about African political systems. There was also Nina Emma Mba, who meticulously documented Nigerian women's resistance, including the Aba Women's War and the Abeokuta protests. So these were not just exercises in recovery of women's history for recovery's sake. They were strategic interventions that made it impossible to claim that African women's political marginalization was somehow both traditional and cultural. There were also people like Molara Ogundipe Leslie, who gave us Stiwanism, social transformation, including women in Africa. And I won't go into this because I know my time is limited, but she also made notable contributions. Amina Mama also took us into the belly of the beast. Her work on militarism and masculinity in Nigeria showed us that the post-colonial state itself is a gendered project that is built on particular performances of violent masculinity. She made it impossible to analyze state failure without analyzing patriarchy, or discussing security without discussing whose security is secured against whom and at what cost to women. There's also Charmaine Pereira, who did something equally vital. She also has built institutions, just like the person we are honoring today. Now, this is the intellectual lineage in which Professor Funmi Paramalam's works should be grounded. But lineage is not inheritance. Professor Paramalam has not simply continued these conversations. She has fundamentally reoriented them around a question that her predecessors identified and she has made inescapable. How do we move from documentation to transformation? So Nancy Rose Hunt, who was mentioned in the concept paper, urged us in 1989 to attend to the placement of African women's history and the location of gender within this history. Over the course of her career, Professor Paramalam has answered that call with a body of work that does not luxuriate in mere location. The recently published Gender and Development in Nigeria: Concepts, Issues, and Strategies, a reader that she co-edited with me, is not an archive of what we know. It's a manual for what we must do. Considering the architecture of that volume, 7 thematic areas, each moving systematically from analysis to strategy, from socio-cultural constructions of gender identity to peace and security. This is not accidental. The reader embodies Paramalam's core methodological conviction that scholarship that cannot inform policy is a luxury that Nigerian, I'm sorry, I was distracted. The scholarship that, scholarship that cannot inform policy is a luxury that Nigeria cannot afford, and that policy uninformed by rigorous analysis is destined to fall and fail. One of Paramalam's chapters in the book, Why Patriarchy is Still an Issue for Nigerian Feminist Theory and Practice, is a case study in intellectual courage. At a moment when people are questioning whether patriarchy is reductive or essentialist, Paramalam insists on its continued analytical power, just like many feminists of note. She defines it not as an abstract theory or concept, but as a lived, quote, wicked social system of rule that thrives on female subordination, unquote. So it's simultaneously an ideological construct, a social construct, and an organizing principle for economic and political life. I'm talking about patriarchy, I hope we remember. Why does this matter? Because vague oppression cannot be just dismantled in an easy way. If we cannot name the system, we can't change it. If we reduce patriarchy to individual bad actors or unfortunate cultural residues, we miss its structural character, the way it is embedded in laws, institutions, economic arrangements, and the daily architecture of Nigerian life. And here is where Professor Paramalam diverges from much contemporary feminist scholarship. She refuses to separate knowing from doing. And that's why I also mentioned Pereira's work, because Pereira also tries to do this. Her work, that is Paramalam's, with organizations like the African Center for Leadership, Strategy and Development, her collaboration with practitioners in gender activism in Nigeria, her consistent presence in policy rooms and community halls, and also in academic pursuits and training of policy leaders, is not just scholarly engagement or public intellectualism as an afterthought. This is integral to her methodology. She's demonstrated year after year that a feminist analysis must inform policy design, development planning, and social justice activism. And she's insisted on all this being organically grounded. This is scholarship that gets its hands dirty. It enters rooms where budgets are set. It sits in uncomfortable meetings, some of them interminable, with ministry officials. It translates complex theory into actionable frameworks without diluting intellectual rigor. Today's panel embodies this commitment to praxis. We have among us scholars and practitioners at different career stages, working across different domains united by a shared conviction that gender analysis is not an optional requirement for development work. It is the foundation. Dr. Damilola Agbala-Ajobi will challenge us to move beyond the tired rhetoric of quotas and tokenism to imagine truly transformative reforms in Nigeria's political architecture. How do we include not just more women in politics, but create a politics that's no longer structured by masculine violence and patronage? Tobi Adewumi represents, and forgive me, when I just call people plainly, represents the generation that inherited this intellectual tradition and is now extending it in different directions. Her work on fragile femographies offers us conceptual framework for understanding the precarious lived realities that Paramalam documents. She'll help suggest possible ways in which established theory should be challenged. Where can we extend these theories, and how can scholars bridge the often separated worlds of dense academic theory and grassroots activism? She'll bring this to us, right? Dr. Omomayowa Abati brings the urgency of youth politics into our conversation. The Not Too Young to Run movement has energized a generation of Nigerians, but we must ask, does youth solidarity adequately address the intersectional barriers that young women face? Or does youth solidarity risk reproducing the same gender-blind politics that it wants to dismantle and challenge? And crucially, how do we forge intergenerational coalitions that harness both the energy of youth movements and the wisdom garnered through struggles of established gender advocates? Let me be absolutely clear on what we're doing here. This is not a celebration of a scholar and activist in a conventional sense. We also have among us Professor Dung Pamsha, who is a renowned scholar, a gender activist in his own right, who has made tremendous contributions to scholarship, to academic inquiry, and also to training the foremost scholars and policy experts in Nigeria. He's internationally renowned. I can't wait to hear from him. So we're celebrating Professor Paramalam's work. Her scholarship, I think, invites rigorous engagement, not reverential silence. We're honoring her work when we take it seriously by testing the propositions she makes, identifying maybe the limits, and extending the insights that she lends, and also asking where new theoretical and practical interventions are needed. The stakes are extraordinarily essential. I'm almost done. Nigeria's development crisis is inseparable from its gender crisis. Every index of state failure, poverty, insecurity, educational collapse, healthcare inadequacy, bears the disproportionate weight of women's suffering and marginalization. The promise of development has been perpetually deferred for the majority of Nigerian citizens, and this is most acutely felt by women. This is not coincidental. In my opinion, it is structural, and I think Professor Paramalam also shares that notion. As Professor Paramalam reminds us, patriarchy is a wicked social system of rule that is oppressive to women because it is an exertion of male dominance over women. It is deeply invested in misogyny and discrimination and marginalization of women. The word wicked here is not a rhetorical flourish. Dating from its first use in 1967 by Horst Rittel in Policy Studies, a wicked problem is one that is difficult to solve because of incomplete, contradictory, or changing requirements. Patriarchy is wicked in both being morally reprehensible and systematically resistant to solution. It adapts and morphs. It hides. It presents itself as natural, as traditional, as inevitable, but it is not. Confronting such a system requires both scholarly rigor and practical courage. It demands that we move beyond endless documentation of inequality to the formulation of actionable, context-specific strategies for transformation. It requires that we build not just arguments, but coalitions that are tenaciously working for the world that we hope to see and the transformation that we hope to enjoy. We should not just engage in critiques, but in building institutions. We should not just be interested in producing knowledge, but in gaining structural power that, devolves to the advantage of the majority. This roundtable I see as a call to action. It's grounded in the conviction that a new, robust, and actionable gender agenda is not merely desirable, but imperative for Nigeria's survival and for Nigeria to flourish. Such an agenda must be forged with the intellectual courage and pragmatic resolve that all the scholars have mentioned, and Professor Paramalam, as well as those gathered here today, and many other gender activists and scholars have modeled throughout their careers. The question before us is not whether Nigeria needs a new gender agenda. The question is whether we have the courage to build one. Let's begin, and I thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Ma, our distinguished chair for today. Thank you so much. Thank you, most importantly, for taking us back in history, trying to align the lineage of Professor Paramalam. And that was quite interesting for me as a historian. And also, thank you for laying a good foundation for today's conversation. So many things you've touched on from your welcome address. And may I also say, Ma, that you look so elegant in your traditional attire. All
We're
right.
celebrating independence.
Happy independence, Ma. All right, Ma. With your kind permission, I would now invite our keynote speaker, Professor Dong Bashar, who will further set the stage for today's conversation. Professor.
Thank you very much, moderator. Let me say that I'm happy to see again or meet virtually with Professor Okome and Professor Fumi Paramalam, MNI, whom we met, I think, about 6 months ago in church at the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies. Let me also thank all the other colleagues on the panel. I also want to thank the Graduate Research Clinic for the invitation extended to me to be part of this discussion this afternoon. This afternoon. Let me also appreciate Professor Paramalam, MNI, who is a professor of gender and development studies at the National Institute, for sustaining these roundtables. I'm told that this is the 8th edition, and I think this is heartwarming. because I believe that each of these roundtable sessions come with knowledge production, knowledge sharing, and like Professor Kwame said, it comes, with praxis. What do we take forward, in policy interventions, and how we can, push further in terms of advocacy. So this is heartwarming, Prof, and I think that you should keep this up. Let me thank Professor Kwame for doing justice, in that introduction. When I was asked, to make this keynote, and I said it was going to be for 10 minutes, I was just wondering what the keynote speaker will speak for 10 minutes. But I think that she's done a very wonderful work in that introduction. So what I have decided to do is to ask this question. Why are we investing time to discuss a new agenda for promoting or mainstreaming gender in Nigeria? Is it a problem worth discussing? And listening to Professor Kwame and the discourse, in the on gender and a number of issues that we have discussed, in the past, and what is contained in the book, which has been made reference to. I would say yes, we have a problem on our hands, to discuss. And particularly that video, although it was not very clear, but I think the point was made that as a nation, we're still experiencing persistent underrepresentation, of the Nigerian population generally in decision making and in politics. And it's the worst, I mean, it creates a lot of problems when we relate this to the women gender. We've also witnessed unmet commitments, particularly the conventions and the documents that have been signed by the Nigerian government, ranging from the National Gender Policy, CEDAW, Beijing Platform, the SDGs, and the rest. We, as a nation, we've not made, significant progress in achieving the outlined objectives that are contained there in those documents. The thought, reason why I think this is a problem for us to reflect on is that we are experiencing a democratic deficit where half of the population is excluded, from meaningful participation, and women indeed are excluded. If you get, like Professor Kwame, noted, the number of women in our institutions that drive, policies that drive, development, women are visually absent. And then we think that the repeated, legislative failures should be mentioned as well. I'm referring to the National Assembly's of Nigeria rejection of gender bills many a times, and the 2020 episode, is very problematic, for us who have followed developments. Now, all these, show that old, strategies are not working, and hence the call for a new gender agenda. And so I would be arguing, making just 3-4 points, and paying attention, since this is about gender agenda. I thought that I shouldn't be discussing everything within, because the 10 minutes would actually be very small. So I decided to pick, an aspect, of what we do in public policy analysis, where we discuss, agenda setting. And I said that could that be one of the areas that we had a problem, from the beginning. So I'm arguing that the gender agenda in Nigeria was framed mainly as a welfare issue. It was also framed as a development issue, and it was framed as an international compliance issue. I'm going to explain this. Number two, I said the problem with this framing is that it depoliticizes, struggle, and I think Prof has made this very clearly. And it also instrumentalizes, women's rights. And again, I would explain this. But importantly is for us to know that it leaves, it left power struggles intact. In other words, the issues around power structures, are not mentioned at all in these, framings. And of course, it definitely affects implementation of projects, related to gender. The third argument that I'll be making is that the framing affected the appropriateness and the quality of gender-related policy interventions and programs. So because the policies, the framings, were interest-based and were not holistic in nature, it affected, the quality and the appropriateness even of the programs that we saw. And the last point that I will make is that the new framing and the program implementation would need to shift, to issues around citizenship, around justice, and also systemic transformation. So these are the major arguments that I have made and I will be explaining. So where is the source of the problem? And I argue that, in framing an agenda, there's a lot of politics. So framing is political because whoever controls, the frame often controls the solution. And in Nigeria, we know those who are controlling the framing. We have just mentioned the fact that our National Assembly is just made up of men. And you can tell, from that whoever controls, the frame also controls the solution. And the kind of solutions that we have seen them churning out, from the National Assembly and other institutions, shows clearly that we are not there yet. And of course, competing actors, the elites, the media, often battle over which narratives dominate. And we're happy that the media is helping here because we know that there are comrades, in the media, there are comrades in other civil society organizations. There are also comrades in other, organized groups, who are making sure that the right narratives or the interest-based narratives, our own interest-based narratives, also have access to the media and also on the table for policy. And of course, we also know that the winning frame, determines whether the issue gets prioritized or whether it's ignored or whether it's even distorted, in the policy process. So I'm giving this background for us to know where we were and where we are, and what's happening to us, and where I think we should be going and what we should do in order to improve on this framing. So in the past, the extant gender agenda, has been framed in such a way that, like I said, it's welfarist in nature, it's protective, in nature, it has a welfare and protectionist, frame where women are presented as vulnerable groups, needing protection and welfare, where you now advance maternity health, microcredits, issues around domestic violence. But the very problem is that issues around social justice and power, are not really taken on board, when framing such discourse. Framing such policies, seeing women as vulnerable groups. So, because without power, yes, you can give microcredit, and it ends up there. So we think that the issue of power, should factor in this welfare and protectionist frame. The second framing that we have seen is around developmental and instrumentalist areas, where women are framed as mothers of the nation or as tools, for development, and therefore policies like educating women would reduce poverty, would improve family health, and boosting productivity. And it's just like the first frame. It treats women's inclusion, as a means to other goals, not as an end in itself. The international compliance, frame is the frame that tries to meet the global commitments, of CEDAW, Beijing, MDGs, SDGs. This made, gender policy appears as a donor-driven, checkbox exercise, rather than a homegrown political demand. We just finished a study of the SDGs, from a trade union perspective, and this point was made very strongly that our country and all the groups that were supposed to be monitoring or participate, in the SDGs, see this problem as something that is external, because they were not well domesticated, and people were not brought on board, at the time of national conversion of the broad SDGs. And I think is a big problem for us to continue to reflect on. And the basic problems were the depoliticization of gender, framing them as beneficiaries, and making sure that microcredits are advanced to them. Even when they had credits, issues around land ownership and political leadership, was not part of it. When they were even seen as good for development, issues around negotiating for issues around development was not even taken on board. The Ministry for Women Affairs, had gender desk, but they were basically just symbolic, no real power behind it, and issues around budgets to even empower these ministries was very, very weak. So all these were attempts. What I'm saying is that these attempts, probably well genuine and also well thought. Well discussed. Did not really address the real issues, of gender. As we as our group and our thinking, and we as ideologically based individuals would want to see them happen. And so what these framings did was just to humanize women, but not as political actors. It focused on inclusion without transformation. It talked about incremental progress, but there was actually structural transformation, and that's what we can see now. More women in schools, and that's the argument that has been made. More women in schools, but no one is talking about the political power behind this. So again, I'm paying attention to framing, because I think as we will be discussing, what we should do in looking at the new, agenda. I agree with Prof. Because there's nothing new in the sense of what we will be suggesting, but what will be new would be the kind of approaches that we will use in order to ensure that we achieve the goal of having, a more robust, a more acceptable, a more functional, and a more actionable agenda for women. For gender mainstreaming. So, in resetting the agenda for gender, I would suggest that we need to recognize and strategically address issues around power and representation. We need to pay attention to issues around resources and redistribution. We need to pay attention to institutions and how we can enforce laws, that our governments, have appended their signatures on, whether they are international conventions or national laws or national policies. The new agenda should have a discussion around conflicts, or security, and a gendered state. And I think this is very key. And this is why we were talking about that our national institutions are heavily dominated by males. And then we'll also have to look at how we can connect, with the global situation. I also tried to reflect on how we can push this agenda. Because this has been one of the major problems that we in Nigeria have faced. There are fragmented collectives, here and there, all working towards the same goal, but the synergy, has not been strong enough. And I think that this is something that we need to think about, very creatively. Just about 3 weeks ago, a group invited us to Abuja, both male and female comrades, and we're discussing the launching, of what was called the Male Feminist Network. And the basic idea of the conveners was to make the point that, look, this struggle is not a women's struggle. This struggle is not for a section. This struggle is a national struggle. It is a struggle for both men and women, but we need more men to get into the field and do what we call evangelism. To tell other tell traditional institutions, tell religious groups, tell our colleagues in offices, tell whoever we know that, look, there is a need, for a more equitable society where both genders, would enjoy what we call in Nigeria the dividends of democracy, but more importantly, how we can enjoy the nationally generated proceeds from whatever is being done. So that movement, is there. But I'm also aware that there are other pockets of groups that are meeting and also sharing the same idea. So my first point is that for us to push this agenda forward, there is a need to build big political coalitions. And I think that Paramalam, since you're in the field, we should find a way, of getting all these groups, into one place and have a discussions on how we can push further. Our international friends are there, the Okomis and all the comrades, that are outside the country, can support us with ideas on how we can move this. But the first point I'm making is that political coalitions, must be built and must, be sustained, so that we can achieve the goals that we have put on the table. I also think that we need to target, gatekeeper institutions like political parties, budget offices, the judiciary, the electoral commission, where gender reforms can be institutionalized. As a matter of fact, the National Assembly, I missed that. Now, these are gatekeeper institutions that we must target. I've been reflecting that, yes, during political campaigns, why wouldn't we start right away, from discussing how political parties, ensuring and pressurizing political parties to put these agenda, in their own campaign designs. If we do this, it will be very helpful. I know some groups tried to do that during the last political campaign season. Some groups were pushing for natural resource, governance. Some were pushing for labor issues. Some were pushing, for different kinds of things. We can also enter this arena of making sure that They discuss it, not just discuss it, not just campaigning it. I mean for these issues, but they must take these issues into their offices and ensure that they implement. I also think that we need to negotiate inclusion in rent system, pushing agenda responsive, issues like budgeting, quotas, yes, agenda quotas, natural resource revenue distribution, affirmative actions, and so on. We need to transform incentives, make sure that our external friends who are helping us must pay attention, to issues around, must embed issues of gender. And so quite a number of ways, that we can push this agenda forward. Now, let me just make the conclusion, because I've been given 10 minutes, that we need to move this agenda beyond just agenda. Paramalam, you need probably to rework the idea of gender agenda. We need, like Professor Kwame said, we need to move to action. While we're not saying the agenda is not appropriate, yes, we need to build it well, we need to frame it well, but at some point, we need to move to action. And I think that it's a very strong point that we must make. And I believe that once we are able to do this, like the SDG says, leave no one behind, and we need to push that, although we just have barely 5 years to go, and how the Nigerian government can achieve this is going to be a miracle. Like I told you, we just finished that study on the SDGs, and we're way behind on all the goals. And I also like what our revised national anthem talks about. Yeah, it draws our attention. Of course, it calls on God to help us, as a nation. But I also think that we need to move. Yes, God is there for us, is willing to help us. I'll just rephrase this to say, "Oh God of all creation." That's what the national anthem says. But I'll also add, "Oh leaders of our nation, oh political institutions of our nation, oh traditional institutions of our nation, oh citizens of our nation, grant us this one request. Help us to build a nation where no citizen is oppressed on the basis of gender, on the basis of geography, on the basis of race." And I think that if we're able to push this, getting our coalitions done,
Uh-oh, I think we lost Professor Pamshad there. Okpayemi, can you confirm if you can hear Professor Pamshad? Is it from my end?
No, I can't hear him.
Oh, okay. Well, that was an interesting one. Do you mind proceeding with the session?
Okay, sir. All right. Before Professor Sham was taking over the network, he has really raised some very critical issues and some strong reflections, and also he has laid background on some of the issues that we need to look at, or that we are seeking to look at today. And one critical thing he has established the fact that there are still gaps, and even as we are looking forward to creating a new gender agenda, we need to pay attention to some issues. So it's not a repetition of the same process all over. And just like he stated, we need action. All right. We are supposed to move on to the praise poetry session now for Professor Paramalam, but the person who is to anchor that is going to join us very soon. But in the meantime, we'll move on to the panel discussion now. Because now that our chair Our chair has set the ground as well as the keynote speech given by Professor Shah. I believe that it's time to hear from our panelists and as they help us to reflect on some of these issues and some questions that we have for them. And also, before we go on with that session, I would like to welcome those of us that are just joining us. You're welcome. We're glad to have you. And please kindly drop your affiliation, where you're joining us from in the comment section. You can also drop your questions in the comment section because we'll be having a Q&A section where we can interact with the speakers and ask them questions. So you can drop your comment there. So we'll move now to the panelist discussion session. And I'm going to start with Professor Agbala Jobi. Prof. Ma. Please confirm you can hear me, Ma.
Yes, I can hear you. Good day.
Good day, Ma. We're glad to have you. Welcome once again. So
Thank you.
I'm going to start this panel session with you. Show some questions to you, then I'll move on to the next person and so on. I'll move on to Mr. Toby Adewumi and then Dr. Omayowa Abati. So to start with you, Ma, how can Professor Paramalam's structural analysis of patriarchy inform more effective strategies to overcome the entrenched barriers beyond mere quotas that impede women's substantive participation and leadership in Nigerian politics?
Okay, should I go ahead?
Yes, Ma, you can, Ma.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, the chair of this round table, the keynote speaker and the honorary and other panel members. I sincerely appreciate the privilege to be on this panel discussion. I've had looked forward to meeting Professor Paramalam and Professor Kume. So I'm sincerely grateful for this privileged opportunity. Let me just go straight to answering the questions. Professor Paramalam at structural analysis of patriarchy actually emphasized that patriarchy is not just a cultural attitude, but a deeply embedded system of power relations, institutions, and social economic structures that perpetuate male dominance. And our work kind of challenges feminist theory and practice in Nigeria to move beyond surface level interventions like quota and tackle the root cause of exclusion. But there's somewhere in that book that says patriarchy is not a uniform, static, or uncontested concept. Neither is it inherently inevitable. Rather, it is a historically, culturally, economically, socially, and politically determined construct that subsists along a continuum of mitigating forces. And so having read that, I think there are some analysis for me that can inform more effective strategy. And one of the first that came to my mind is for us to have a shift from tokenism to transformation. Because while quota often results in symbolic representation without real power, Paramalam's critique urges us to ensure that women in policy are not just present, but they're actually empowered to lead. They are empowered to influence policy and challenge the patriarchal norms. And secondly, I feel that there's a need for us to have a reframed political participation as structural justice. We need to reframe, and I think the keynote speaker actually talked about that. We need to reframe political participation as structural justice because Paramalam's work calls for a kind of redefinition of political participation, not just access to seats, because sometimes they give them assets. They won't tell them not to pay for forms, but they need access, and the keynote speaker actually mentioned that, but they need access to resources. They need access to networks and decision making. So this means that we need to kind of reform our political party structure so that we dismantle the male-dominated hierarchies within our political parties and then provide financial and logistic support for women candidates and then create mentorship and leadership pipelines for women at grassroots level, because that is where it starts from, and it's very important. And thirdly, the issue of intersectional feminist practice. You know, Paramalam has actually highlighted the need to recognize the intersectional barriers. We know we have religion, we have ethnicity, class, geography. So the strategy we must adopt must be tailored to address this layered exclusion, especially for rural women and religious minority women. And fourthly, is the issue of cultural reorientation, and public education. It is very, very important. Women themselves are the custodian of culture. How do we see patriarchy? How do you understand values and custom and tradition of the things we need to do, understanding of what is expected of us? So structural patriarchy thrives on cultural myths about women's role. We've been, women's role have been, domesticated in the home front. And so this analysis Prof gave supports massive civic education campaigns to challenge gender stereotypes and promote women's leadership as normative, not exceptional. Because I think those are the things that I think will go a long way to help us go beyond just quota. Civic education for me hinges on all these things. Once this is done, it will go a long way to say quota is not just enough, but we can take some of these steps I've highlighted. Thank you very much.
All right, Ma, thank you very much for your ideas and thoughts on that question. And one critical thing you've raised is that there's a need to dismantle the cultural ideas that are woven around patriarchy. Thank you very much. Now I'll move to Mr. Toby Adewumi. Please confirm you can hear me, Mr. Toby.
Yeah, loud and clear. Can you hear me too?
Yes, I can hear you. All right, Mr. Toby, your work on fragile femographies uses the colonial feminist lens to rethink how West African women and girls are represented, whether in lived realities or even in global cultural productions like animation. So, how does the concept of fragile femographies help us to understand the lived realities of Nigerian women that Professor Paramalam documents? And where might this concept challenge or extend our theorization of patriarchy?
All right, thank you so much for this opportunity, Okoyemi. It feels awkward to make comments even though I'm part of the organizing team, but I think it's also important I state that positionality. I come to this conversation from a standpoint of bias for Professor Paramalam's work, not only because I've engaged it for a while, but also because I've spoken with her, I've engaged her as a person, as a human being. And I realized that she's one of, as it stands today, leading lights in gender and development studies in Africa. And I guess that's a convenient way to start what I would call my contribution, even though the duo of Professor Okome and Professor Pam Shah had well laid out the foundation of what, we now call, the gender turn in Nigeria's development trajectory. But before I continue, permit me to tell a story that happened recently. I and my wife are grad students here in the United States, and on one of those occasions, we were brainstorming on how we want to provide the right cues for our kids, especially our daughter. What are the values we want to instill in her, even though we are far from home? How do we train her as a woman to become self-sustaining, independent, and confident in herself? And so we started scouting for movies, for, educational videos that would, inform and educate her. And so one of those videos we stumbled on was a recently produced movie by Disney called Iwaju. Immediately we saw the trailer, we felt, oh yes, this is useful for a Nigerian living in the diaspora, especially for a kid. And so we thought that was going to introduce her to some of the elements of culture, elements of respect that, is very much embedded in the Yoruba culture. And so we started watching Iwaju, which is a series, a 5-part series with R. And on one of those series when my daughter was with us, she was curious. She was almost sad that these characters seem to be always in perpetual victimization. She's always at the receiving end of the stick. She was confined to stay at home by her father. And when she snuck out with the driver to explore Lagos Island, she encountered, all sort of dangerous elements in Lagos. And eventually she was kidnapped, which is almost the story a lot of people are familiar with when it comes to crime in Nigeria. Just yesterday, I was watching a heart-wrenching video of a woman in Lorry who just lost her husband. And every time we see Nigerian women, they are framed as being vulnerable. And so my daughter was sad. She became, a little bit concerned that this character seemed to always be losing out of things and doesn't quite represent what she thinks a Nigerian should be, because she was in Nigeria. We gave birth to her in Nigeria. She's seen her mom, she's seen her aunts, she's seen, our parents, and she knows that Nigerians are resilient, Nigerians are strong. And so why is it that this lady in the animated movie, is always portrayed as, as being a victim? And so this gave me a lot to think about when it comes to portraying African women. And so my wife and I decided to convene a panel at the African Studies Association on that movie. We wanted to hear the perspective of other colleagues about that movie. And so we convened a panel at the ESA in Chicago last year, and we were amazed to see the kind of comments people were making. So it turns out that especially the global north always frame development in Africa as an intervention. And so that's why you say, oh, we want to bring back the girls, as if even though they were lost, there weren't already mechanisms for finding them in Nigeria. You see, oh, let us help women. And so this is why it always amounts to saving people in the global south, especially women in the global south. And we all know that aid hasn't so far helped Africa. And so through one of the engagements I've had with colleagues here, especially Professor Faye Harrison, one of the renowned Black anthropologists, I began to see the need to rethink what I now call fragile femographies. And so when I use the concept of fragile femographies, I'm drawing from two distinct works. One is from Kristen Kateloff, who, walked around what she called unconscious epistemologies, how people are not aware that there are people who are actively creating knowledge, even though they are seem to be behind in the scheme of things. And another work I drew on was on Edward Soldier. Anyone who has been working on urban-related work would know Edward Soldier is one of the most prolific urban theorists. And in one of his important works, which he called Postmodern Geographies, he talked about how people narratively write out the global south. How, when you look at the map of some global south countries, you really find small and thriving groups of people who have been there for centuries. So in the way that the world describes Africa, in the way that the world describes Nigeria, most of the times they consciously, unconsciously exclude the work and the movements of people who are called marginal, who are called vulnerable. And so I began to draw this to work together to explain what many people don't just live on a daily basis, but are now seeing on a daily basis, which is fragility of women. And Professor Don Pramchak aptly captured this when he said the welfarist agenda, the welfarist framework for framing women empowerment hasn't so far helped us. Because when you see a woman has always been on the receiving end, you strip her of her agency to act in her own interests. And, when we talk about gender most of the time, or when we talk about gender mainstreaming, it is, as I said, always as a means to an end and not as an end in itself. So why don't we begin to see gender as the actual ambition that Nigeria's development plans should aspire towards? Why should it be just one of the subsections, even in the United Nations SDG goals, that, oh, we should aspire towards gender equity, as if that is something that hasn't always been in the mindsets of Africans. So I'm beginning to read and learn from Professor Parmalam's work on how that even the concept of patriarchy isn't so much a bad thing. Although, as many scholars have described it, it is suggesting the inequalities that have always existed between, gender. But it is also a useful analytical tool to understand how that despite these inequalities, we can find elements of resilience by women who have been historically marginalized. And so despite the fact that Nigeria is a patriarchal society, we still find people like Professor Paramalam, we find people like Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, we find people like Dr. Obi Ezekwesili, we find people, interestingly, like Senator Natasha Akpabio-Oduor, who are trying to challenge this patriarchal system and are succeeding at it. And so if we say let's erase patriarchy, we are already saying that we want to sideline the work that these important people are doing. So I believe that understanding patriarchy is central to understanding why Nigeria needs to reframe its development lens. But let me focus on two core issues that I feel might be of use to our conversation here. Number one, how do we frame development agenda in Nigeria? We've had series of development plans, and I don't know what the current administration is working towards, but they always have a plan when they come into power. Right now, I know Nigeria's foreign policy is hinged on the 4D principle, and one of the principle is development. One of the strands of that principle is development. And so when we talk about development, what exactly are we saying? Are we saying that development has to be given? Or are we saying development has to be aspired towards? Are we saying development is already existing in its own little way, although we need to compound and increase the activities that accelerate them? What exactly are we saying? So Professor Paramalam's work makes us understand that development has been existing in some form, even though we don't often acknowledge it. If you look at the work that she's been doing at NIPSS, that's the Institute of Policy and Strategic Studies, you realize that even in capacity building of professionals who are administrators in different fields in Nigeria, that's a form of development, human capital development. She has been in the system for at least 20 years, and a lot of people have come through her. And although we don't know them, but they are being thrown into different sectors to begin to replicate what they learn from art. And you find that there are other female scholars, whether they're in gender studies or in other fields, who are also beginning to replicate themselves in their mentees, in their students, in their colleagues. And whether we acknowledge them or not, they're already doing some work. I was speaking with somebody recently how, right now in the UK, there's someone should I say leading, really front loading UK's Heritage Studies program, and she's a Nigerian. And so we find all of these examples of African women who are leading, and yet we say development is missing in Nigeria, or development is lacking in Africa. Yes, if we conceptualize development the way the Global North does, we would always see development as lacking. But when we begin to reframe and adjust our lenses to see how women in their own capacities have been leading the fight, as it were, against anti-developmental elements in the country, then we know we've already had development in some form. We only need to escalate or portray the work that they've been doing. So that's the first thing I'd like us to consider. What exactly is development? Now, the other thing, and this speaks directly to one of Professor Paramalam's chapter in the book that I was reading, Gender and Development in Nigeria, that Professor Okome referred to earlier. She talked about why patriarchy is still an issue in the Nigerian feminist theory and practice. And, interestingly, it came after I was having a little bit of chats with a member of the GRC recently, just a banter about how that even his meme, his pictures and posts on WhatsApp reeks of patriarchy. And I hadn't even read this chapter before I made that comment, but I came to realize that many people in Nigeria, and this doesn't exclude women, are just reproducing the way they were trained without them knowing it. So what does it mean when you make a woman a victim in your movie? Isn't that what you're seeing around you? Or what does it mean when you're talking about a woman in a sexually objectifying manner, even though she's your wife? Isn't that because you've seen and heard and you celebrate that on social media? Or what does it actually mean to lynch a woman and agree to that? And I'm talking about the Niger State student now who was lynched some time ago because of her faith. Is it not because you've seen other people lynching women and celebrating that? And so we find different examples of how, whether it is a man or a woman, who contributes to the quote and unquote disempowerment of women because of the way they've been socialized. And so what Professor Paramalam, I think, is trying to point out here is that patriarchy is all around us. And unless we begin to identify and deconstruct them in even our sense of tradition, even in our sense of religion, or even our partisan beliefs, we will keep perpetuating those injustices against women. And that's why I took the animation seriously. It was really concerning for me, as it was my wife, that our daughter at this stage in global development cannot see an example of a movie, an animated movie that postures and projects an African girl in positive light. And so I was asking from colleagues, oh, can you help me do a list of movies that African children can watch and they can actually benefit from? And so one of my colleagues in Ibadan started compiling a list of movies and songs and things like that. And I think this is what Professor Paramalam and our folk are doing. They're providing alternative reading lists to what is out there. They are making us realize that even in the education sector, especially in our higher education sector, there are already a lot of influences that are negative. And unless we begin to provide alternative examples, then these things will keep being perpetuated. Because when you hear sex for marks, when you hear, intimidation, these things are performed by professors. Professors who claim to profess but have a lot of sins to confess. So I believe, in my own opinion, that the like of Professor Fumi Paramalam are giving us an alternative model to what is already existing in our society for us to begin to model our children after, to model the younger generation after. I haven't met her in person yet, and I'm hoping to meet her one of these days, God sparing both of our lives. But the little time I've spent engaging her over the phone made me realize that this is someone that I ought to keep on my contact list for a long time to come, because she listens as a mother does, then she makes comments. She, intervenes in such a way that, this person is not objectifying you. This person is actually empathizing with you and are able to help you navigate this situation. She told me about how she also had to raise twins while she was in grad school. And I know Professor Coleman also has shared that experience sometime on social media. And so when I see these women's examples, I'm encouraged. My wife is encouraged. Our friends are encouraged. And we're able to help other colleagues who are also experiencing those things to navigate, because we know people ahead of us have navigated them. So now I want to shift to concrete policy proposals. And because we're having a conversation on Independence Day, Happy Independence to Nigerians, I think it's important we begin to talk about revising our curriculum in our universities, secondary schools, primary schools. At what level is gender sensitivity taught? Do you wait till a child graduates from the university before you expose that child to gender sensitivity? I was sharing an experience with my wife this morning. I dropped off my son in school, and he saw a little girl crying, and he wanted to go hug the girl, and for some reason he pulled that to himself, and they both fell down, and the girl cried even more. And I saw the teacher carefully, gently nudge him back up and told him that this is how we hug. We hug kindly. And as a father, I sat down, or I stood there, and I was wondering what kind of lessons would have been communicated to children right from the early childhood if they were gender sensitive. I know that back home, and this is not a jab to any educational outfit out there, but I know back home, they probably would have blamed the boy or the girl. And so this kind of contestations, this kind of divisions are already sown in the minds of children right from that early age. So at what point do we need to start teaching children, whether male or female, to be gender sensitive? That's the first recommendation I would like to put forward. Another one is, how do we get to have debates around female participation in a very objective manner? I know Dr. Bhatti will say a lot about this because he and I spent some time talking about his research yesterday. A lot of people don't know that having debates is also important to informing the society about what this candidate is able to perform. The reason why the world is the way it is today is because people shy away from ideas. Right now, I'm in the United States where the conservative right are holding sway power. And recently, I don't know if we heard there was an assassination of one of the most ferocious conservative defenders. And it was all about having debates. It was all about discussing how those values contradict and stand in tension with other values. But if the shooter had actually paid attention to what Charlie Kirk was saying, they probably would have realized that he's not so much different from me. Even though I have different beliefs from him, he's a human being who wants to protect his kind. I'm a human being who also want to protect my kind. So how do we come together to have conversations around meeting at the middle? So we need to start having national conversations, and this is what our national institutes are meant to convene. The NIA, I beg your pardon, invites ambassadors, invites foreign diplomats all the time. At what point do we have conversations about the country's gender agenda? The NISA too also organizes what they call the policy summit. At what point do we have conversations around gender agenda? At what point, even at the National Assembly, where Natasha was, in a way dehumanized, can we begin to have conversations around the gender agenda? So these are the things I like to put out there as we keep reflecting and ruminating on these issues. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Toby. You've raised quite a lot of issues, and I can relate with your story on the Iwaju movie. I was privileged to also watch it, and I think one critical thing from your comments, a lot of things you said, is the role of media representation of gender and how African women are portrayed through media representation, the stereotypical portrayals of African women as victims or symbols of resilience. And I think one thing we also need to look at as the conversation goes on is we need to look at how to reimagine these fragile realities. And you also mentioned that patriarchy is not totally a bad thing. Those are quite interesting comments you've made, and I look forward to our other panelists and also our chair helping us, uncover some of these issues as we go on. So now I'll move to um, Dr. Mayowa Bati. Can you hear me, sir? Can you hear me, sir, Dr. Abati? Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, so it's not the Dr. Abati of Arise News. This one is the Dr. Abati of University of Texas. It's nice to have you here, sir. All right. So your research focuses on youth political candidates and representation. So I would like to ask, to what extent does the not too young to run movement errantly address or risks overlooking the specific gender challenges young women face in seeking political office as analyzed in the reader's governance section? You have the floor, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Gwen. And I want to also appreciate everyone who is on the call. And in particular, I would like to appreciate our honoree, which is Professor Fumi Paramalam. I want to thank her for her work and for the years of dedication to gender agenda and gender studies that she has given. I'd like to thank our chair as well, Professor Mojuba Olu Okome, who has been a great mentor, in many regards across several platforms that I have had opportunity to engage her virtually, even though we haven't seen in person, but I've engaged with her work in several instances, and I've also had opportunity to be under her mentorship. I'm not sure if she would even recall me anyway, but it's important to mention that as well. I also want to thank Professor Dongpan. Rhetorics we have also come across in the course of trying to do some gender works and some youth studies that I've been engaged with. And in particular, I'm also thanking my own former HOD, who happens to Professor Agbala Jobi, who was my teacher at the University of Obafemi University, and my HOD, and for the many engagements that we have had over the years. I would say that it's an honor really for me. I don't think I should be in the class of the people that should be commenting on gender issues, because I won't consider myself a gender scholar, but I would say I came into the gender discourse by accident. Maybe not necessarily somebody who set out to study gender, but in the process of doing my PhD study and trying to understudy the youth movements, the not too young to run movements in Nigeria, I continuously and consistently saw that it was very important to engage the gender lens, because as the work progressed, it became very important that we wouldn't talk youth without talking young women. We won't talk young women without talking gender. And at the very, at some points in the study, it became very important that even though I found it difficult to interact with women politicians because there were very few, and it was difficult to track some of them down, because it's easy to speak to people who won elections, because you can easily go to Abuja and just enter into their office and say you want to talk to them. Not like it's easy to get them, but I mean they are public figures. But somebody who contested and didn't win, there's no track record of how to get them or where to get them. So it was kind of difficult when I was doing my study to reach many of those people. But despite that, I would say that I was able to get in touch with a number of female politicians who contributed significantly to the study. And I could then see that the gender lens in discussing youth issues was very important. And that's how I would say I accidentally got into the gender debates. And one of the areas that I think my work, especially when it comes to the intersection of youths and gender, comes to speak or kind of reinforces the arguments that Professor Paramalam has made, is in this area of the advantages and alternatively the disadvantages that women, especially young women, face in the political arena. And this is something that oftentimes is not given so much emphasis. And I think that's something that she was able to highlight, despite the fact that it wasn't something that was very much in the open in the gender debates. But despite that, her work was able to come to understand. And there was a particular emphasis that she had in the chapter 3 of her work, which with other panelists have also mentioned, where she talked about son preference. And she was able to help us trace the preference for sonship to not just within the political space, but also down to the family settings, where male children are given preference over female children, whether for inheritance or for seniority or authority within the family, or for several things, really. And you see that this does not end at the family level. It also transcends into the political arena. You know, when you get to the party level, and some of these things, when you look at them holistically, are the things that then culminates into, you know, concessions that are even given to women not having effects. Because, I mean, some other scholars, Professor Agbala Jobi has made reference to it when she was talking about parties giving concessions to women. And sometimes you see that these concessions don't even have effect because, I mean, there are informal structures that have not been dismantled. And some of the things that I would like to highlight as part of the issues that the work of Professor Paramalam has highlighted and has put forward, but that we need to probably put more emphasis on is the importance of informal structures. Definitely, patriarchy is believed to be a structural issue. Gender is believed to be a structural issue. But oftentimes when we say structural, where we tend to pay emphasis on is the formal structures, trying to make reforms within the legal frameworks. As important as those things are, I mean, studies have come to realize, and part of what we younger scholars are also seeing with our own research is that while the formal structures are important to change, it's important to change them, to reform them, to renew them, and all that. We are coming to realize that patriarchy is an hydra with many heads. So as you are cutting one, it's growing other heads. And as it's growing other heads, some of the ways to actually mend the other heads that is growing is to tackle the informal structures. Drawing on some of the empirical results from my own PhD, I came to realize that, and this is something that other scholars have also highlighted, the works of Janegat, for instance, which has talked about the homosocial networks between political parties, which gives preference to male, young male. And this plays out, if I were to use an example of the Nigerian context, this plays out where you see examples of godfathers and godsons. We don't get to hear goddaughters, but we hear godsons. These are informal structures, not perfectly represented in the formal structures, but they are norms that are perpetuated at the informal level. And if some of these norms are not dismantled, I want to believe that if there's going to be a new gender agenda, this would be the area we should be focusing on. And I must say also that Professor Dong Pasham has also probably even said it better than myself, in the sense that the framings in which we bring out the reforms have also been not very helpful. When framings are around developmental issues and women are seen as people that are mothers of the nations, and people that should be helped, such that when we help this engendered species, the nation will be better off for it. Even while these things are correct in themselves, there's a need for us to go beyond this kind of framings. And whether it is the welfarist framing as well that he has also alluded to, where, you know, for the most part, it's more about empowering women, you know, to be able to hold, you know, to be better in the society as a endangered species. While these things in themselves are not, I won't say they're a problem, but we need to go beyond all of that to go into more or less the systemic adjustments that needs to be made, and justice in particular. Because, I mean, if we say part of the arguments that I made in my own work is that if we say that, for example, my work was focused on parliament, society, and women are like, then how representative is the parliament if the women who are more than half of the society are not in the parliament? And these are the institutions that make decisions. That is more or less, it's about justice. It's a just argument. I think the framing should go beyond this welfarist developmental issues to more important issues about justice, because it is only just that the institutions for decision making are representative of the majority of the demography that makes up the society. I mean, that's a justice argument, not a welfarist argument. It matters less whether they are an endangered species or not. As far as they are part of the society, they make more than half of the percentage of the people in the society, then they should be there at the decision table to make decisions that affect them as a people. And I think those are the kind of framings that we should begin to see. One of the challenges that the Not Too Young to Run, because I think the direct question that I have to respond to is whether the Not Too Young to Run as a movement sort of sidelined or didn't think well enough about the women or the gender lens that youth also carries with it. And I think it would not be wrong to say that the Young to Run movements did not completely take into focus the gender lens. And the effect of it is very clear. I mean, elections have held in 2019, and statistics, we can begin to see what the effect has been. Even though young men have not been elected in their numbers as well, but we have seen that young women have not even seen any effects. And the reason is not far-fetched. My part of the arguments that I made is that the reason even that the law even made it to passage is because it did not tackle the status quo. It wasn't going to change the status quo. It wasn't going to affect anybody. It wasn't going to stop anybody from, or the formal hegemonies from being elected. So it didn't matter whether it was passed or was not passed, because where the challenge has always been with representation, whether it is youth representation or gender representation, women representation, has always been at the party level. And I mean, other speakers have made allusion to that we need to pay attention to the gatekeepers. And the core of the gatekeepers have been the political parties. And I think, for me, I continue to argue, especially, that even when we then pay attention to political parties, we need to pay attention with an intersectional lens, bringing together age issues, youth issues and gender issues in the same room. These conversations should happen not separately. There's an article that is coming out shortly that I had just written where I was arguing for gender ageism, that there is gendered ageism. We cannot continue to have separate arguments. We're making arguments for young people, and then all of a sudden we remember that, oh, contained in young people are also young women. If we don't design policies to capture both the youth lens and the gender lens from ab initio, we will come to realize that as we implement these policies, it will leave out one group which should have been contained in the policy all along. And that's some of the arguments that I have made. And that's part of still speaking to some of the works that people like Professor Okome have also written about, and Professor Malam have also mentioned in their works. And so for me, while I wouldn't say that we really have the need to completely frame out a new gender agenda, but I think we need really to kind of reshape the kind of reforms that we are seeking for, really. Actually, because I kind of specifically work on parliaments, and because I believe that the parliaments I work on parties and parliaments, basically. And I feel that these institutions are very important. They are very important because, for example, the parliament makes decisions. The parties churn out people who can be elected who can be elected by the public. And if we don't pay attention to these two institutions, we really cannot make headway when it comes to gender issues. One of the theories or lenses that I have been using to make this analysis has been feminist institutionalism. And because I believe that it brings in the importance of institutions in many of the reforms that we are seeking to have, the agendas that we're pushing. We can push these agendas without institutions. We need to reframe how many of our institutions consider gender or how they frame gender issues. For example, Professor Dong Pangshan was making allusion to the fact that our parliament has continuously and consistently pushed aside gender bills, not considering them to be important. And I dare say that the current gender bill that is out now, if last week there was all sorts of march in Abuja by women who are pushing the gender bill. I think, in my opinion, that the current framing of the gender bill may count for something. And why I say it may count for something, if I were to go by the way the Not Too Young movement also pushed its way through the power blocks, they ensured that status quo was not disrupted. And I think that's the framing of the new gender bill. The new gender bill has been framed in a way where They're saying, oh, we are not affecting the seats of men. We are not saying don't contest. We are not holding your seat, but add more seats. Give us reserved spaces such that we can then contest on a level playing ground with ourselves. But then the question then needs to be asked, because my own focus has always been young women. The question then needs to be asked, are we going to raise new inequalities? Are we going to create new unequal grounds? Because if structural issues have held women back from winning elections when they contest with men, they don't have the same level of money, they don't have the same level of power, they don't have the same level of influence in the political parties. They are not taken serious by homosocial capitals and homosocial networks. Those are our arguments. If we then say women contest with women, questions really, have we also considered the power structure between old women and young women? Are we going to create another unequal platform for women to contest? So these are questions that we probably need to answer. I have faith, some kind of faith, that the new bill may pass through. But I think that before it passes, we also need to put some sensitivities into the context of the bill, such that we don't create new power structures, even among the female gender. Because I also believe that the older women have strong power. I mean, they are better placed than many of the young women. And when we put them to elections to contest, I'm not sure if the grounds are really equal for the women. And those are some of the questions that I'm currently teasing with, I'm looking at, and I don't have answers to them. Like many of us as researchers don't have answers to them at the moment. But then I think these are conversations that we need to have. It was Toby earlier on who was saying the importance of having conversations, the importance of debating about these issues. We can have differing opinions, but I mean, it's important to talk about them, to revisit them from time to time, and to review our opinions about some of these issues. This is the way I see some of the things around gender. Like I said in my earlier on, I won't consider myself a gender scholar. I accidentally came into the gender debate through my work on youths and youth movement. And I think it's a very important conversation to have. I'm more interested in us having intersectional debates, considering not just the gender of a person or the age of a person, but also issues of culture, issues of resources, issues of platforms, issues of opportunities. When we put all of that on a pedestal and then we discuss them in a continuum, and I think it's easier to come to very informed decisions and policies that can help even the gender debate itself. I think I'll stop here and then allow other people to pass their comments. Thank you very much.
All right, sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Abati. You've also raised some very critical issues and questions. And I think one interesting thing we've seen from all of the panelists is that they're all coming from different points of view, but there is a meeting point. And for me, that's quite interesting. And then from Dr. Abati, you raised a lot of issues, very interesting issues and questions that we look forward to getting answers to. And he talked about moving from a welfare system to a justice system. And then he also talked about the intersectionality, that we need to do away with just single discussions, but to have an intersectional discussion. Quite interesting ideas and comments from you, sir. So now we'll move to the Q&A session, and also a short commentary from our chairperson, Dr. Okume. Chairperson Ma, please, if you have questions, you can raise your hand or you can drop the question while the chairperson makes some comments and ask questions. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I have enjoyed listening, and I tried to listen closely. I'm concerned about our understanding that, gender and patriarchy are structural. And then when we think about the actions of individuals in the within these structures, we begin to not understand that that structure incentivizes people to act in the way that they do. And then you hear things like, oh, women are always not supporting women. Women don't support women because the structure that we have does not give you any reward for supporting women. So if you are a smart woman and you want to get ahead in that structure, you don't support women. That's the meaning of the structural constraints. And I'm very disappointed a lot of times when we acknowledge that something exists and we don't really see the way in which it's a through line into the ways in which we as individuals behave or even groups behave. So patriarchy is only meaningful if you understand this about it, that even though you are a woman who has power in your own right, you have agency, you are not going to be rewarded for supporting an agenda that dismantles the effect of patriarchy or making decisions that disadvantage the patriarchy. So that's why the women would act in the ways that you are observing. Not that, these women, what are they doing and whatever. So I would like to see us being more aware, and for this to inform not only our analysis, but the praxis that we have in maybe fighting patriarchy or moving away from the welfarist and protectionist to the justice-driven agenda. Now, let's be clear. Women are not unidimensional, and they're also not, so they're not homogeneous. There are women who need protection and welfare, and then there are women who don't. But saying that women, we're acting as if women need protection and welfare all the time is problematic for me. Are we supposed to abandon the women who need protection and welfare and say that, there's a larger agenda that we're serving and let's not pay attention to the welfare issues? I think that would be a disadvantage to the majority, because majority of women are poor. Majority of women are not privileged. Majority of women really need a state that lives up to its obligations for protection, security, physical security, and guarantee of human security. It's even constitutional. So we need a state that lives up to the constitutional obligations, as well as what I've heard several of my colleagues say, that, the state also needs to be awakened to the responsibility that it has undertaken when it signs all these glorious declarations that are international, or it says it wants to do the SDGs. These are concrete claims. And then for the state to now be saying that, oh, these are not domesticated. The reason why they are not domesticated is that the state is not interested. And the work of trying to domesticate has actually been undertaken by people who have been doing this work without getting any gratification in terms of acknowledging that this is important and taking it on. So, I think we also need to be aware of that. Now, in terms of what we tell our children and the portrayal of women as perpetually weak and so forth, I think it's also, first of all, we owe an obligation to all our children, male and female, to try to disrupt this patriarchal infusion into all our lives. Well, I dare say I've done it. I have I had two boys. Now they're men, in their 40s and 30s. And I tried to do this. It's very hard because you are swimming against the mainstream of what social structures are there. I think also that, the whole institutional work that needs to be done within parties, within elections and how we manage them, within the institutions like the National Assembly, the presidency, the bureaucracy. That work, I want to applaud the activists that have been doing it. I think it is a labor of love because it hasn't yielded tremendous benefits, but that doesn't mean we should stop, you know. So let's agree that simultaneously there's an agenda that ought to take care of the vulnerable as well as, you know, transform the structures of domination that we have. And if we don't undertake both simultaneously, we're just going to not get anywhere. I was very happy to hear from Professor Agbala Jobi in terms of where she sees us needing to go. I agree. This Iwaju thing, I haven't seen it, but you know, stereotypical portrayals are all over the place. And I think those of us who are critical of it, we also need to start producing you know, counter narratives, counter, you know, programs that do what we think needs to be reimagined. Is patriarchy not a bad thing? Well, you know, it depends on whether you are a loser or a gainer as a result of your position within the patriarchy. And if patriarchy is marginalizing, if it's oppressing, if it's disadvantaging, if it is obdurate in the face of progressive measures to extend the benefits of citizenship to all on an equitable basis, then it's bad. We need to dismantle it. You know, but there's no system that totally disadvantages everybody, you know. And because, like I said, patriarchy is a system where if you comply with its norms, you are going to gain. You'll find women who have gained traditionally, who are gaining contemporarily, and who would gain in the future, you know. So tearing down that system and making sure that we have equitable conditions where we would all thrive, making sure we have a state that is awakened to its responsibility constitutionally and in terms of the social contract between the people and those who govern them is the agenda we need to pursue. And we have to realize that power is not conceded. It has to be demanded, and those who demand it must be ready to work relentlessly and tenaciously to make for the future that they expect. Well, I'm going on for too long and I haven't raised any questions. I enjoyed hearing everyone, but I think we need to understand what structural really means, that it binds you, it incentivizes you, it rewards you when you comply with its norms, and it punishes you when you don't, you know. And you could be male, female, or anything else, you know. It doesn't matter. That's what the structural thing means. So if we realize that, we have a long struggle, but it's not an impossible struggle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma. Thank you for those excellent reactions to the issues that have been raised. All right, we'll move to the next section now, which is this section is we're going to ask the panelists some questions very quickly. We expect them to respond to it as soon as possible, as brief as possible, rather. Then before I move into that, I would also read some comments in the chat box, which I expect that the panelists will respond to them even as I ask them the next question. So I have a comment here from Oluwatoyin Kuteyi. She says, dealing with gender sensitivity in a patriarchal state or society requires a shift from mere awareness to action. The goal is not just to accommodate women within the existing system, but to challenge and dismantle the underlying power structures. I really do not know how we can in a deeply entrenched system like ours. I believe that it is what we should look at. All right, thank you, Ma. And there's another comment from Niri Miracle. She says, okay, no, okay, she's just greetings, okay. Then there's another comment from there's another comment from her. I appreciate Dr. Abati's perspective on the intersectionality in the pursuit of gender equality. The possibility of younger female politicians being displaced by older ones is an important concern, and the potential emergence of new power structure also warrants deeper examination. Thank you for your comment. Okay, there's a comment here from Toby Adewumi. Power is not conceded, it has to be demanded. How do women demand it when they are structurally incentivized to concede it to the other gender? All right, so those are the comments and questions there. I'll move on to the next session now to ask the panelists their question and also respond to some of these comments in a very brief. All right. So to Professor Agbala Jobima, please can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, Ma. So the next question which I want to ask you is in the light of much of your scholarship has interrogated electoral reforms, conflict, and peace building, and you have argued that quick fixes like quotas are not enough. So I'd like to ask, in the light of the gender-blind nature of Nigeria's political machinery highlighted in the reader, what specific constitutional and legislative reforms would you propose to create a more gender-responsive political ecosystem? You have the floor, Ma.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the feedback. It's quite difficult, but let me first start from talking about a kind of a framework to explain the gender blindness in Nigerian politics. And I'm going to look at the system thinking, looking at the African City Research Consortium framework to explain this gender blindness. You know, politics as a system of interconnected barriers. And so that ACRC framework views cities and by extension, political systems as interconnected systems, you know, shaped by different actors, institutions, ideas, and power dynamics. And so in Nigeria, gender blindness is not just a policy oversight. It is a systemic feature of political settlement, for example, that kind of prioritize elite male interest. And so we need to, so the argument is that that gender blind nature of Nigerian political machinery is a product of this entrenched political settlement that kind of exclude women from the domains of power. It excludes women from ideas and resources. And so this system thinking will help us to see how this exclusion are reproduced across electoral processes, the party structures and governance institutions. So whatever solutions we prefer, if these systems is still there, if these structures are still inherent, there's no way we can work. So because we are saying beyond the quota, yes, beyond the quota, what can we do? But if the structure we see is still inherent in the system, it won't work, because the political economy lenses and kind of emphasizes who is holding power and how is it negotiated, because that will determine the policy outcomes in Nigeria. And so political settlement in Nigeria for now is male dominated. There is this issue of elite bargain where women are really part of the negotiation table. So whatever decisions we make, whatever outcomes of policies, it will not work. So the idea is that we need to look at this gender exclusion. It's not just incidental. It is embedded in this elite bargain that shapes the Nigerian governance system itself. So that's why the quotas are not working, because who are the people behind the system? So until women are part of these bargains, reform will remain superficial. Until we keep saying 30%, the political parties, are they ready to give 30% to women or whatever percent? So there is a need to prioritize a complex problem. There is this deeply rooted issues that require multi-level intervention. We need to start from there. That multi-level intervention is important. So gender exclusion in politics is one such problem. So the framework we encourage us to do these iterative, context-specific solutions that engage actors at local, levels. It's very, very important. City and national level. So reforming political parties, all these issues to support women, that's where we need to start. And so we create a city level gender council to influence national policy, which is because we've been doing quota, it's not working. We engage religious and traditional leaders to shift cultural norms, because we all have stories of how women have done well. Nigerian women are doing well. But what's the culture at the local level? Professor Kome had mentioned, we can't neglect the fact that some women are doing well, but is it, how many percent of women are actually doing well? When we need to engage religious and traditional leaders to shift this orientation and advocacy, I'm sure this will go a long way. And we need to diagnose the problem systematically. Looking at the electoral system, the candidate selection, campaign financing, the governance structure of political parties themselves. Are women there? Women are kept as women leaders. But when they need to take major decisions, they are never there at the table. And the cultural institution itself, religious gatekeepers, are they helping? And they have a lot of role to play, because a lot of Nigerians, a lot of us are very religious, and our leaders can go a long way. And of course, we need to encourage, identifying leverage points, places where small changes. We need to start. I think we are just thinking about starting big. We can start from those small places where small changes can lead to systemic shift for gender inclusion. These are places I think we need to start from. Those electoral act reforms, mandating gender audits, party constitutions. Our political parties are not doing public procurement laws, reserving contracts for women leading businesses, all this, and then build coalition for change. We have women who are doing well, but we need to build coalition so that we can use those coalitions to dismantle gender blindness. We must build coalition that include women's group, reformist politicians, civil society, and everybody that has the mind. So these coalitions will help to push for constitutional amendment, help to push for legislative reforms, and cultural reorientation. That, for me, it's very way. So it's a political and systemic problem. And so we will look at this framework, help us to guide these strategic multi-level interventions that can kind of transform the Nigerian political ecosystem into one that is truly gender responsive. If we don't do that, then whatever solutions we prefer will not help. That's my intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your talk. All right, I'll move to Mr. Adewumi. So my question for you is, can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, loud and clear.
All right. My question for you is, drawing from the gender and development in Nigeria's readers' interdisciplinary approach, how can young feminist theorists and practitioners effectively bridge the often separated worlds of academic gender theory and grassroots activism to build a more resilient feminist movement in Nigeria?
Well, that's a loaded one. All right, so thank you once again for this your interlocution. Quite important. And I would like to start by also centering your voice, Okoyemi, because you're not just a member of the GRC team, you're also a colleague. And before we had this session, interestingly, Okoyemi and I were talking about who was going to moderate. Ideally, before we have events like this, she focuses on the back end. She's more comfortable doing back end work. And I told her yesterday, Okoyemi, you'll be moderating. And she was like, well, there are issues around me, structural issues, my environment, the background, the lighting. I was like, see, I personally don't care about those things. All I care is that your voice is centered. And so I think this is already a way we can begin to put women in the forefront when it comes to taking lead on projects, even within political or cultural societies. And this is why I was talking about Iwaju not as the only way that African girls and women are objectified as weak and vulnerable, but also as a representation of the larger framework or the larger ways in which women are, epistemic, permit me to use that word, epistemically subjugated. Yes, I got it. Now, what am I saying here? Movies, songs, pop culture generally are what a lot of young people relate with, especially in this generation. And if you don't communicate to them through those media how they need to be more sensitive and, tolerant, and not just tolerant. And I think tolerant is not a good word to use in this instance, accommodating, then it becomes difficult for them to accept that at the policy level. Because let's be clear, policies are made for people and not vice versa. And so, regardless of the government that comes into power, regardless of the policies they formulate, if the people whom those policies are made from are not consciously educated to be sensitive to these issues that the policies are throwing up, there is no way they're going to implement it. Even the policymakers themselves, the street level bureaucrats who are supposed to execute these policies, might even run foul of it. And that's how you see that even policemen are the first to abuse women. Look at what happened during the NSAS protest. Most of the people who were sent to shoot at young women, young people, were policemen. Are you telling me that they were not trained in the military school, the defense academy, or in the police academy, the importance of, the Nigerian government's gender policies? Or are you saying that the Inspector General of Police or the Chief of Army Staff doesn't know what these policies are? Obviously they do, but because the people who these policies are meant to guide do not even understand the logic, the reasoning, the ideologies behind the formulation of those policies, they will definitely run afoul of it. So I appreciate when Professor Coleman was saying that we should be very clear about the thorough line that flows through patriarchy in the ways that women are incentivized or rewarded to perpetuate the injustices against them. That is something I don't think we can, say we would overcome in the next, say, 10 years or even in the next century, God knows when. But what I'm concerned about is spatial patriarchy. And I think I need to make that distinction. In Professor Paramount's work, she distinguishes between the different forms of patriarchy. She talks about, violence against women as a way or manner in which patriarchy is manifested. She talks about harmful cultural practices. She talks about even in recognizing a particular gender, the son preference. That is also a way of manifesting patriarchy. She also talks about conjugal relations, how women, in marital relationships are usually treated as a weaker vessel. As the Bible says in 1 Peter 3:7, treat women as a weaker vessels. And so some men ignorantly use that as justification to molest and abuse their wives, without recognizing that what Peter was actually saying there was for men to recognize that women are indeed emotional, more emotional than they can be. And culturally, they're already put beneath men. And so if you are going to marry at all, you have to come to that position where you realize that your wife is already being marginalized by society. You need to be the one to give her the platform, or you need to promote her in a way in which she is no longer recognized as a weaker vessel by the society. So I'm saying even our cultural and religious customs and beliefs sometimes perpetuate these kinds of patriarchal structures. And that is one of the things that we need to start talking about in dismantling patriarchy. I'm up for dismantling patriarchy. As a matter of fact, sometimes even I let my wife take decisions a lot because I trust her judgment better. She literally runs the house because I've learned that I need to pay attention to our wisdom. And that is what African women have, wisdom. And we don't take that seriously a lot of times. Why is it that grandmothers, women, are the ones who convey stories to their, to their children, to their grandchildren? Why not the men? Why is it that even in the marketplace, when women are gathering to rebuke a child, it is women you always find telling the child how that their family is not known to do that? It's because women are the custodians of any form of knowledge. And so if we don't recognize that even in development planning, it makes it difficult for those kind of knowledges to be extended beyond the current generation. And so I I'm surprised that whenever decisions are to be made, whether at the Federal Executive Council or even within the states, you rarely find women who are consulted, and you expect that they will be able to take decisions that would, will guide the next set of leaders. No, that's not true. So what Professor Paramalam is putting forward in this text, and some other scholars are written beautifully around, why we need to pay attention to issues like, involvement in politics, why we need to pay attention to issues like, increasing the budget for the Ministry of Women Affairs, Women and Youth Affairs, which frankly I think is a duplication of role, because if you have a ministry that caters to women, there is no way that ministry won't also cater to youths. But anyway, let's assume that's one of the ways they are trying to siphon funds from the government. But yes, that is something that should be done. We should also talk about actually empowering women in the grassroots. And that's something Professor Paramalam, through the Gideon and Fumi Paramalam Foundation, have been doing. I've visited their website a number of times, seen the kind of projects they're doing, empowering women in the grassroots, trying to address the root causes of violence, which is because women are not given the rightful place they deserve amongst decision makers, and they will definitely object and rebel against such policies. When you see a woman involved in violence, it is most likely because she wasn't involved in the decision making, and she needs to stand up for herself. So what am I saying? My own concern right now as a grad student, as a scholar who's beginning to pay attention to these issues, is the whole idea of spatial patriarchy. How are women in Africa, women in Nigeria, women, say in Ibadan, are conceptualized within the larger frame of work, and how does this inform rather the educational, curriculum? Because I know that yes, there are a lot of out of school children who might not have the privilege of attending, universities, or attending this kind of elite institutions where they will be trained in these ways. There are yet informal groups, community-based groups, faith-based groups, where these young women can be reached out to, where they can be accessed. And it is high time we're going to pay attention to these informal groups. And that's why, just like Professor Agbala Jobi and Dr. Abati had said earlier, I'm very keen on informalities. I'm very keen on how do we extend the knowledges we receive from, the ivory towers to other organizations, other corporations, other institutions that may never meet with the ivory tower. As a matter of fact, the GRC is hinged on the very idea that the academia cannot remain on its own. It needs to connect and extend to the town. And so in all my research, my engagement with colleagues, I always ask the question, so how does this yield benefit to those who might never access this literature? We publish a lot, and it's good we keep publishing, but how much do we communicate this knowledge to someone who might not be able to access our publications? So that's the way I think the reader brings us into this framework. The reader was published publicly. I saw some of the videos. I don't know if you have the opportunity to look at the photos where people were invited from the community to the book launch. People probably were not in the university, or probably may not have even worked with Professor Marlon before, were invited to come listen to what this book is about. That's a way of communicating knowledge. I also saw opportunities where Professor Parmalam have given talks. She's been invited to, TV stations, radio stations. She even has a TikTok, or what maybe it was Instagram channel, where she gave talks. That is what we call public intellectualism. How would you be a scholar who has invested time, effort, and resources in working on an issue that is very dear to your heart, and you expect that the university itself is who will communicate those issues to the audience you're working for. You have to go online. You have to go out there yourself. So I think really we need to start putting ourselves out there. That is one of the ways we can begin to address these issues locally. And I'm talking about this epistemic violences against women. For me, as a young man and as a father, it is my own primary responsibility to give my daughter the tools she needs to navigate our own world. I don't expect to dictate to her because I trust that she's able to take decisions on the basis of her own experiences. But I need the tools to navigate this patriarchal world because let's be clear, it is everywhere. There is patriarchy well and alive in the United States of America, patriarchy well and alive in Canada. I was just reviewing a case yesterday about, very very important, issues about the history of patriarchy in Canada. So just to sum up, I'm saying that patriarchy is everywhere, but at the root of this are these epistemic issues, which is one of the things that are dear to my heart. So the reader gives us a very good example of how we can begin to address patriarchy within our respective communities. Thank you.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. Very quickly, I will just move to Dr. Batty. Just want you to touch and respond to the question as brief as possible. So, Dr. Batty, how can the intergenerational solidarity between the youth movement and established gender equality advocates, as embodied by Professor Paramalam's work, be harnessed to create a more inclusive and powerful coalition for political change in Nigeria? Thank you, sir. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Toby already made mention of some of the things that I'll be saying to respond to that question. One thing that is very important is there's that need for there to be synergy between the academia and those who are in civil society advocacies. It's very important that we pay attention to the kind of research, or we allow research to inform the kind of policies that we are bringing out. That's something that is very important. I'm currently engaged in a project where we are trying to understand what the effect of people's ability to speak multiple languages has for conflict and conflict resolution. And right from the stage of designing even data collection, we're already involved with industry partners, trying to understand what's likely to be the impact of our work, on the grassroots, at the medium level, and at the national level, and at the international level. And we've not even started gathering data, and we're already engaging in impact. Something that I feel that we can begin to do as academics. And as generation of scholars, a lot of researches have been done by several generations of scholars. And there's that important need for us to put those information out there. Toby was making allusion to the need for scholars to leave the ivory towers of academia and intersect with the very public that they want to effect the change on. And I think that's something that we need to take very importantly. There's the opportunity of audiovisuals with the kind of technologies that we are having with social media and everything that is coming out now. A very good example that comes to mind very easily that I think we can relate with as a Nigerian public is what some social, I don't know how we call them now, I think they are content creators are doing. I don't mean the comic content creators. I mean people like the doctor, the medical doctor who does videos to educate the public about very minor things and then makes it very important and very educative. I've forgotten his name. I think Aproko Doctor, yeah, that's the name. So when you look at what those kind of people are doing, and then there are people within the legal sector as well that are doing similar contents, we churn out a lot of knowledge. We are a knowledge producing sector as researchers. It's very important that we begin to understand that we need to break these things down to the very people that need to understand it. Not just the politicians, not just writing policy briefs alone for politicians to read, because they don't even read it anyway. So, many of them don't read it. But it's important that we let the people on the ground understand the importance of what we are doing. When we do that, they will take on the task themselves to challenge the powers that be. It may be hard, it may be a tenuous journey, it may be a difficult process, but it will eventually happen. I think our work is we need to see the importance of educating the very people on the ground. A few scholars are already doing things that I think are ingenious. One of our mentors within the Graduate Research Clinic is Professor, our historian, Professor Aderito. And from writing books and articles, he's gone into doing documentaries. These are things that people can sit in their television, in their homes, on the set television, and watch and get really informed about. All these things are important. I know it's funding, it's heavy funding and all of that, but we need to gradually move towards there. We need to go beyond just writing articles and publishing in good journals alone, but to also go beyond that to say, come, we need to do things that the public can relate with. When the public relates with it, they will by themselves find ways to break down the structures that are holding them down. I want to believe that. And one of the recommendations that I have that I feel we can use to break this intergeneration challenge is also that we need to demonetize politics. Honestly, it's something that worries me a lot. I kind of feel that we can, I don't know how, but I believe we need to demonetize politics. If it is not incentivized to snatch a ballot box, if there's nothing to gain when I get into office, in terms of maybe money or the influence of power or something, I'm not sure the kind of people that are involved in politics will really be interested in politics. And by that way, we can get the right set of people who are driven by ideas and not just their stomach to be involved in politics. That way, it won't be difficult to get gender balance. It won't be difficult to get women who are idealistic, who can come in and influence and, shape policy and bring about development, to be involved in the right decision-making platforms. And those are two ways that I have looked at it. I feel that, it's difficult. I'm not saying these are easy things that we can just implement tomorrow and then we get a result next tomorrow. I'm not saying it's that easy, but I'm saying these are things that we should put at the forefront of our mind and work towards. As academia, we need to calm down. We need to bring our solutions, our academic outputs. We need to find a way to get them down to the people. I know there are already ways that these things are being done, but I still feel that it is not enough. It's not getting to the people. It's not getting to people that need to hear about it, and those are things that I think we need to put together. When we do that, it will be easy for the people themselves to take to take the bull by the horn and march for their own interest and break down the barriers that are holding them. But what I would not recommend or I would not want is a situation where the people are marching blindly, are not informed by some very quality information as to, okay, if we achieve this, what are we going to do next? Because those are things that research will show clearly. If we get this, then we can go on to do this, and then we can get the result that we're looking out for. And I think some of the works of our pioneers, people who have gone ahead of us, who have done, we're looking at the works of Professor Paramalam today. There are several other scholars, even within the room, who have done many other works. When we put all of this together and we put them in a way that it's relatable to the ordinary people, I think we will have more results trickling in by themselves with very little effort from our hand and henceforth. I don't know. I think I'll stop at that.
Thank you very much, sir. I quite agree with some of the issues you've raised. Thank you so much. All right. Having listened to this rich perspective, at this point, I would like to invite our honoree to share our reflections both on what has been said and on the road ahead. Professor Paramalama, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, moderator. And let me begin by first expressing my very profound gratitude. I actually have a deep sense of gratitude to the Graduate Research Center for this very, very high honor. And I think my greatest sense of gratitude comes from knowing that not many people have the privilege of understanding that their work has been of value. And that's what I've felt this evening, that there has been great value to the work that I've done over the past few decades. So I want to sincerely thank everybody for that. Let me thank the chairperson, Professor Mojubaolu Okome. She was very modest when she listed the names of various scholars that my work has been grounded in. She didn't mention her own work, which is hardly surprising. I know her to be a very modest person. But honestly, over the years, I have quoted copiously from her work, and I want to thank her for her humility in accepting to chair this forum, and also the very powerful, pertinent ideas that she has put out there this evening. And I agree with everything that she has said. So I want to really thank her. Thank you, Professor Dung Pamsha. It's Dung, by the way. Those of us in Plateau State, we know it to be Dung Pamsha. For the ideas you've put out there, and all of the panelists. I not only enjoyed listening to the panelists, but I also felt enhanced in my own knowledge by the things that each one of you shared. So deeply grateful. So very quickly, let me just maybe just a few issues that I would want to highlight and probably put out some pointers, beginning from the initial remarks by the chair about intergenerational movement and the need to make sure that there is that handing over of key knowledge points. I felt that was very, very important. But the main thing that stood out for me in what she said was about intellectual courage. And this cannot be overemphasized. In the work that I have done in the gender space, gender activism, particularly looking for campaigning for gender justice, advocating in the policy, in the NGO world, I found that courage is so important as a currency for advancing the dial in gender justice, gender equality. And I think that in speaking about a call to action, she mentioned this call to action, and I agree with her entirely. But very often people think that a call to action means, okay, we stop talking, we stop debating, we stop thinking, and we start acting. No, they are to be done simultaneously, because every meaningful transformation is to be formed by strategic thinking, critical thinking, system thinking, creative thinking. So we have to think, and we have to debate, and we have to act simultaneously, thinking on our feet, so to speak. So I really want us to keep up, the engagements, the strategic engagements, and knowing that we are not calling for a shift from research, from academics, from debate to action, but we are calling from an expansion. We are calling for them to be treated with equal value and respect. And to me, that is actually why at a certain point in my academic journey, I realized that I needed to move into policy-engaged research. I needed to move into action-oriented research that speaks to the people who can make a difference, who ought to be making a difference, and research that goes to the grassroots, that goes to the people and says, look, here is some change we could consider together. How do we plan together? So for me, this is what gender research is all about. And now let me just quickly comment on what Professor Dung Pamsha has said. And once again, I agree with him on a lot of things that he said. So he talked about the democratic deficit. I would even say not just the deficit, it's actually a critical deficit, but it's also democratic distortion, in the sense that what we do have is not even democracy, really, because it's non-participatory, it's not inclusive, and it's not transformative. And so these are issues, if we're talking about gender through an intersectional lens. And thank you very much, Dr. Abati, for emphasizing that. If we're talking about gender in its multiplicity of diversity, inclusiveness, and equity, then that is the only time we can be talking about democracy, a genuine, authentic, and transformative democracy. And we really need that. And one of the questions that was asked later on was about what kind of thing can we do to the Constitution? That was that question. And this is where our Constitution has not produced a democratic society. One of the reasons is because the federal character principle lacks a gender principle. It lacks a gender component. Not only that, there are ambiguities within our Constitution that do not lend themselves to the foregrounding of effective democracy. So those are areas that we need to be looking at. In the book that Toby referred to, our co-edited book, There was, I think, Professor Pamdung has, Pamsha, he has a chapter there. Yes, I remember. He has a chapter, and he's talking about the federal character principle. It's a fantastic read because he highlights how Nigeria has structurally, systematically, and systemically excluded women through the Constitution, lack of a gender character in the federal character principle. The other thing that he mentioned was the fact that the issue of framing, and I do not disagree. However, I would like to point this out. In feminist analysis, they have been discussing this issue of framing and asking, was there a point in which gender became depoliticized, which Professor Pamsha highlights? And the answer was yes. But it had to become depoliticized at a certain point, or it felt it had to be, because initially gender emerged out of feminist dialogue, feminist movement, and all of that. And so at a certain point, it became like a strategic decision, a tactical decision as well, to say, let's decouple the feminist ideology from gender so that we can make some practical leeway, some practical headway in providing for the women that Professor Okome was talking about. The vast majority of rural women, of poor women, of marginalized women who need immediate intervention in the development world. So it was a strategic choice to do that. Now, has it worked to some extent? Yes, it has. But how do we now bring back, reclaim, a gender agenda that had been co-opted by the development world away from its original political intentions? And I think that is where I agree with Prof. And I thank you very much, Prof, for some of the suggestions you made. One of them, I had made this suggestion in one of my chapters on citizenship engagement and how we need to focus on female citizenship. And you mentioned that, and I think we need to develop that further. By the way, the male feminist movement in Nigeria is an idea that I believe is long overdue. And I look forward to engaging with that movement. I look forward to the coalition of partnerships that you mentioned. And I also look forward to it being a movement that goes beyond mere rhetoric and that actually interrogating patriarchy, challenging patriarchal discriminatory measures and systems and structures, and actually bringing about a transformative society based on a new gender analysis and mainstreaming. I want to really also appreciate the issue that Professor Damilola mentioned about structural justice and moving us from tokenism to transformation. And, I couldn't have said it better, because from tokenism to transformation, I think that's something it's something we should really all rally behind. However, I feel that we need to go beyond advocacy and some of the measures we've already been doing. And we need to look at the Constitution and have a fundamental restructuring of the Constitution. The Constitution is not fit for purpose when you think of all the many gender discriminatory provisions that are contained within it. So the transformation has to begin, for example, by taking the national gender policy and making it a law, as has been done in many other countries. You mentioned, Professor Damilola, that we have been doing quota and it's not working. We haven't been doing quota. In fact, the National Policy on Women, the National Gender Policy 2006, and the National Gender Policy that we have today specified quotas that have not been, they've not been obeyed. They have not been lived up to. 30% initially and then 35%. Imagine if all these decades we had a minimum of 35% female representation in all appointive and elective posts. Imagine how far we would have gone. So we have to begin that there has been strong institutional resistance to domesticating CEDAW and legalizing the national gender policy. So what we have done is that we have paid lip service to the national gender policy, to policy in general. So we need to put legal teeth to the national gender policy, to make it a law so that it's justiciable in court, and all institutions of government can be held accountable for not having at least 35%. And I think the new policy even says 50%. So that's the beginning point. Let me also say that in terms of patriarchy, I agree again with Professor Okome. Neither good or bad. That's not the issue. But what I would want to say is that we must have an intellectual agility in our analysis and addressing of patriarchy. What do I mean by this? I mean that we must recognize that patriarchy has different gradients. It has different types, different dimensions, and different impacts. And so we cannot have a one-size-fits-all in even the way we analyze it or the way we address it. And I've tried to address this in some of my works, that we need a holistic, kind of approach to looking at the different dimensions of patriarchy and how it affects different women, girls, men, and boys. Because while women may have had the short end of the stick, by no means do we believe that patriarchy has not also been a disadvantage to men, because even the seeming advantages are not even sustainable, because they have produced a society that is highly distorted in its approach to power, its approach to authority, its approach to governance. The governance deficit that we have, the governance failure that we have, is riding on the back of a fundamental structural patriarchal society or worldview, that has produced the kind of understanding of what leadership and power and authority are all about. And so we must have a level of intellectual agility as we consider what patriarchy is all about and how we must address it. I think two issues that I just want to quickly bring up. One of them is on the issue of gender dialogues. I think it was Toby that talked about conversations that we need to have around. In fact, I called for gender dialogues. And in speaking about gender dialogues, I'm talking about the need for us in Africa to find our own homegrown democracy, our own homegrown governance culture, within a context of mutual gender dialogues, men talking to men, women talking to women, men and women talking to each other. In other words, all of society beginning to think loudly about gender. And why is this so? Fundamentally, it's not just even about politics. It's also about the profound psychological and visceral baggage that patriarchy and gender carry. Because when you talk about gender, as one man once told me, it's like you are declaring war just by mentioning gender. That there's huge political, huge psychological baggage attached to gender. And we need to begin to talk about these things in a very frank, open, measured way in safe spaces. So we need to create safe spaces where we can have constructive conversations around what gender means, what patriarchy means, what it has done to us, what it's doing to us, and how can we find our way out of it. Finally, on the issue of Iwaju, but permit me to just talk about the media representations, because I've done some work around that as well with Dr. Amina Salihu. We wrote on some things about sexual violence, media representation, and all of that. The point I want to quickly make here is this. Iwaju is not actually a Western concept. It was created, conceptualized and created by a Nigerian. I know his father very well. So he's the son of Fola Adiola. He created Iwaju. It's his creation. And we have a lot of other spaces in Nigerian media, in Hollywood, Nollywood, I mean, that are extremely biased in their representation of women and depict women as wives, witches, and whores, depict women as vulnerable, weak, always weeping. We have all of that. So the issue for me is that how can we engage with those media representations? And by the way, the media has also done a great job in bringing issues of gender to the fore. So it's a two-way street. But I think we need to engage more critically with that. So I've spoken a lot. The last thing I want to say is to just really thank everybody once again. I want to thank those people who have stayed with us, who attended and who have stayed with us up to this point. Thank you for taking out of your time. And I leave this stage very optimistic, deeply gratified, and deeply grateful to every single one of you for this wonderful opportunity. I look forward to more strategic engagements at all levels, on the field, in policy, this policy space, and in the academia. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Prof. We're actually honored to have you oblige us put this together, and thank you for the excellent sum up that you've done. So briefly, I'll invite the chairperson for our closing remark. Prof. Ma.
So we have had a very rich set of conversation. The hour is late. I'm sure a lot of us have obligations that we have to run to. I do. So I'm not going to speak much more. I think I enjoy the response from the honoree, and we all should actually take some time and digest what we have heard. But there's also, I think, simultaneously, as we're thinking, we must be doing, we must also continue to study and figure out ways in which we can practicalize a lot of the very excellent ideas and strategies that we've heard about. But I have to also confess, I enjoyed this tremendously, and I thank everyone for being here, and wish you all well. It's Independence Day, and for me, it's a time for reflection about how far we have come and what remains to be done for Nigeria to reach its full potential. So we all have to take a all hands on deck attitude so that we create the Nigeria that we hope for. Thank you very much. And it's a Nigeria where women take their rightful place as architects of our country's progressive presence in the Committee of Nations, and a place where all our lives are secure, where our human security is guaranteed, and we have a state that shows that it cares, and a constitution that protects us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ma. And we want to say thank you to everyone for staying with us. Before we take the announcement and finally close or rise from the table, I won't say close the conversation, is that transition in GRC to usually have to put on our videos and take a screen grab of everybody for record purpose. So please kindly put on your videos while we have a screen grab of everybody. Thank you very much. Mr. John, are you set? Please, let's put on our videos. Thank you very much. Okay.
Okpayemi, we can't see you.
It's dark here.
Okay.
Have you taken it?
No.
Mr. John?
No, I'm almost done.
Okay, please. Thank you.
And now I have.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. So
have a good rest of the day.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Funmi Paramala. Thank you to our panelists, to our chairperson, Dr. Okume, Dr. Abati, Professor Agbala Jobi. Thank you so much, Mr. Adewumi, and thank you for our wonderful participants who stayed with us till the end. Thank you so much. We look forward to keeping on this conversation on, just like Prof said. thinking on our feet. That is the call to action. Thank you so much. And we look forward to you engaging with us on our social media platform. Let's keep the conversation on there. And well, to our next program, we look forward to having you. Thank you very much.